Ladies and gentlemen, today we are looking at how to manage the impact of COVID-19 and the continued lockdown on rental income. Now, as all of us know by now, on the 23rd of March 2020, the President of South Africa declared a state of disaster and national lockdown under the Disaster Management Act number 57 of 2002. And this lockdown period commenced originally on the 26th of March 2020, and it was supposed to last until 16 April 2020. Of course, these regulations were promulgated with the intention and with the hope that the lockdown and social distancing would stem the tide off and delay new infections of the COVID-19 virus amongst the population of South Africa. This, of course, meant that all businesses in South Africa have been closed down during this period, except, of course, for those businesses which provided essential services and goods. So, in general, people have been confined to their homes. Of course, as you all know by now, this initial period of lockdown was extended up until the 30th of April 2020. And then, of course, as from the 1st of May 2020, this will be reduced to so-called level 4, which is a slight easing of the original restrictions. Now, the reality, of course, is that tenants have been sequestered at home, and they would probably only receive a portion, if any, of their salaries and their incomes. So if you're an investor or a property owner and you're letting this property, the chances are that your tenant or tenants will, by the end of March, if they are fortunate, receive, for argument's sake, 50% of their normal salary. Now, does this mean that they will only have to pay 50% of the monthly rent, or whatever percentage of their salary they will be receiving? Of course, the answer is no. The tenant is, by law, specifically in respect of residential properties, bound by the terms and conditions of the lease agreement. And it doesn't matter if this agreement is verbal or if it's reduced to writing. It is important to understand that these regulations did not and do not suspend the provisions of the lease agreement, and both parties remain liable in terms of this lease agreement. By way of summary, it means the landlord has to provide occupation and possession of the property to the tenant, and the tenant, amongst others, have to pay rent. So those issues did not change, and the law, as far as that is concerned, was not amended or suspended in any way whatsoever. So the question is, and we're inundated with inquiries about this. The question is, so what to do? Because, of course, the landlord relies on this rental income to, on the one hand, pay the bond in respect of that property. And if you're fortunate enough that you don't owe money on it or on a bond, the bond has been paid off, that the income which you derive from this property is important as part of your income. It's not just that you rely on the rent for purposes of payment of your bond or as part of your income. It is also you will have other liabilities in respect of this property. If it's a sectional title, you will have levies which you have to pay. And of course, whether it's sectional or conventional title, the local authority would also want you to pay your municipal rates and taxes. So now the next question, of course, is what to do when the tenant is, because of the lockdown and because of the fact that this tenant potentially does not receive a salary or just a portion of it, if this tenant is not in a position to pay you all of your rent, alternatively a portion of it, as a result of this lockdown. Now, the solution is actually quite straightforward. And it boils down to the following, that hopefully you provide it for a rainy day by, number one, if you have a bond, registering an access or a flexi bond, and you have been putting away a little bit of extra money, a vacancy provision or additional capital repayments, and that you've been leaving it in the bond, or that you have been taking part of your rental income, if you don't have a bond, and that you've been putting it away in some savings facility. Now, if you've done this, then you would be less concerned about the immediate lack of income because you would have provided for this. But the point is, this tenant now approaches you, alternatively, the rental agent on behalf of the tenant approaches you and informs you that the tenant will not be able to pay part of or all of the rent at the end of April, and this would of course apply to the end of May as well. Now, this is actually pretty straightforward, and the reality is that there is enough provision in our legal system to deal with it. And it is as simple as this. If the tenant will not be able to pay at the end of April rent in the amount of, for example, 5,000 Rand, then draft an acknowledgement of debt. An acknowledgement that simply says, I, as the tenant, with particulars of the tenant, hereby confirm and acknowledge that I am indebted to the landlord in the sum of 5,000 Rand by virtue of the fact that I am unable to pay my rent for the end of April. And there are some conditions and provisions added into this acknowledgement of debt, and it is signed by and on behalf of both parties. And what this acknowledgement of debt includes as well is the undertaking by this tenant to repay this arrear amount plus interest, and if applicable, the legal costs involved, for example, the cost in connection with drafting of the acknowledgement of debt, and repay that over a specific agreed period, for example, 6 months. And the catch here, of course, is that you have to attach a page to this acknowledgement of debt, which sets out in more detail the amount indebted, the interest rate applicable, the number of installments, the commencement date, in other words, when is the first installment payable, and the actual installment including interest. Now, let's quickly have a look at a simple calculator. I simply wrote in Excel a simple calculator which will be able to do this. Let's have a look at it. Here we are. As you can see, it's a straightforward, simple calculator. And the point of departure was that the tenant informed you that at the end of April, he or she wouldn't be able to pay the rental. And let's say, for example, that the amount involved is 5,000 Rand. See that? There's the 5,000 Rand. And the tenant is sure that he or she would be able to start paying that as from the 1st of May, because he or she has been told that actually, we should perhaps make that the 1st of June. Here we go, 1st of June 2020, because at the end of April, your tenant is not going to receive a salary. And May will be the month that hopefully this tenant will start working again, and hopefully by the end of May actually again receive full salary, which means just upon or after payday, the 1st of June, the tenant is now going to start paying the installments in addition to the actual normal rent. So if you have agreed, for example, with this tenant that it will be repayable over a period of 12 months, let's insert that there. There we go. There's a 12 months. You'll see the drop down. And you've agreed with the tenant that 10% interest rate is applicable. You can also choose, if you so wish, to make this the current prime rate, which is 7.75%, if I'm not mistaken. Then, of course, you can see it has an impact on the installments and on the actual interest in total. Now, if you use this calculator, then you will see there's your amount that the tenant is indebted to you. It is over a period of 12 months. The interest rate that you're charging is 7.75%. And because of the fact that it's actually a pretty benevolent interest rate, the total interest, according to this calculator, which the tenant will pay you over this period, is the princely sum of 212 Rand and 37 cents in interest. And what it boils down to is a monthly installment over a period of 12 months of 434 Rand and 36 cents. So in your acknowledgement of debt, what will happen is you will actually attach this page to your acknowledgement of debt. In the acknowledgement of debt, as mentioned before, the tenant will confirm he or she is indebted in the sum of 5,000 plus interest. Now let's just make it interesting and say, okay, I'm being charged for the drafting of this acknowledgement of debt, let's say for argument's sake, 450 Rand, and you add it there, 450, which means, there we go, that this tenant will now be indebted to the landlord in the sum of 5,450 being the arrear rental plus the legal cost, and will pay it over 12 months at the interest rate. Now you can see this shows you month 1 to 12, your actual installment and the capital balance over the period. And as you can see, by the end of month 12, then of course there is no remaining balance. And this little document or page is then attached as a final page or as an annexure to your acknowledgement of debt. Very well, we've now had a look at the simple calculator, and we've now established that the easy way out is, of course, the tenant signs or confirms that he's indebted to the landlord in the amounts and he undertakes to pay it. Now, of course, the reality is this. In the event that you as the owner or landlord did not provide for these rainy days by way of a vacancy provision, alternatively additional capital repayments on your access bond, you will be out of pocket. And it will mean that the tenant will only start paying the arrears in, for example, 12 installments as from the 1st of June. Now, if you have not provided, what to do about your liabilities in terms of this property if you have a bond to pay? Now, the answer, of course, is actually quite simple. If your account, your bond account, is not in arrears and you're up to date, then as a very last resort, you will approach your bank where the bond is and simply apply for a moratorium or a payment holiday for a period of 3 months, which would be more than ample to carry you through, because you would be excused for the 3 months or lesser period, which is probably advisable, that you don't have to pay the bond, and you would actually start receiving your tenants' installments as per our example, the 1st of June 2020. And it is literally as simple and as easy as that. You can visit us at our webpage, p3invest.co.za. We're also on Facebook. You can go and have a look at it. It's P3 Investment Group on Facebook. And we also on YouTube. We have a channel there. And if you have inquiries, let me add it here. You can send an email to info@p3invest.co.za. Alternatively, you can also mail me at info@gcsattorneys.co.za, and there you have it. Thank you for your attention and for watching this, and I hope you will all be healthy and prosperous, and I hope that all your tenants will receive salaries and be able to pay the rent.